Hoover Dam is considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. Join us in the next interview with a man who's known for his vast knowledge of history. As an active community figure, his iconic stature can be compared to that of Hoover Dam. With us today is Mark Hall-Patton. So Mark, let's talk about your vision when you decided that museums were going to be your life. Because obviously this has been a vocation for you.
Oh, yes.
Someone who has had the desire to be in the same field for so many years says a lot about the commitment and the passion that you have for it. So when you were a child and you were thinking, what am I going to be when I grow up?
I was going to be a museum director. Mm-hmm. I knew that. When I was 8, I knew that. As a kid, I understood the value of the artifact. I understood that it made history real, to see something from that history. It's not just a book, it's not just a picture, but this is a real piece of history. And that made sense to me. It was something that was visceral. So, when I was looking at what I wanted to do, that's what I always talked about. I always wanted to be in history. I always wanted to be in museums. And I was lucky. I hit a professor when I was in college that sent me to a program at the University of Delaware. I grew up in Southern California, 4th generation Orange County. And, so I was a graduate student. I needed a program in museology, which is what the field is called. And he told me about a program I had never heard of. And I applied, got into it, and ended up going to work after a year. And for the past 38 years, I've been running museums.
And definitely, it sounds like a journey. Now, you said you're originally from California.
Yep.
Were you ever involved in being a director in any of the museums in California?
Yep, I was. I started out as a grants developer at the Bowers Museum in Santa Ana. I then went back to South Dakota and worked with a museum system there, came back out to California and founded the Anaheim Museum in Anaheim, California, was the director there. In there at one point, as a freelance thing, I did an exhibit on the history of women in Los Angeles, did the first exhibit on the history of women there. Then I went to San Luis Obispo County and ran the museum system there for 8 years. And then had a notice cross my desk about an opening in Clark County for someone to create an aviation museum at McCarran International Airport. And I wasn't going to apply for it, but my wife said, why not? It's a 29-cent stamp, which tells you something about how long ago it was. But it was great. I applied and ended up getting the job offered, and brought my family over here and looked at the area to decide whether I wanted to live here, because I don't gamble. I hadn't gone to Las Vegas.
And the weather, of course, was much different than Southern California, definitely.
I used to complain if it got over 75 degrees. I don't anymore, but I used to.
You get acclimated.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the Aviation Museum. That is one of the 3 museums, right, that you overlook at the present time.
Yeah.
Which other museum are you also in charge of?
It's the Searchlight History Museum down in Searchlight, Nevada, which is a small, was a mining town. You go through it when you're driving down to Laughlin or down to Needles along 95. But it's an interesting little community. It's where Edith Head grew up, who won more Oscars for costume design in movies than any other person, grew up in Searchlight, Nevada. Scott Joplin wrote a rag about Searchlight. The first man to fly nonstop across the United States was from Searchlight. It's an interesting
Very interesting.
community.
And are the 3 museums open daily, or are there limitations as far as certain dates?
It varies. Now, the Clark County Museum, where we are now, is open 7 days a week, 9 to 4:30. We're only closed 3 days out of the year: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Otherwise, anytime, but it's 9 to 4:30, and it's only $2 a head. It's the only bargain left in the valley here. Now, the Aviation Museum in McCarran International Airport, and that's the Howard W. Cannon Aviation Museum, that one's open 24/7. 365 days of the year. Anytime you're in the airport, you can see the exhibits, because the exhibits there are throughout the airport. They're not in a separate room. They're above baggage claim. They're out in the gate areas. They're all over the airport, so you can constantly interact with them. But they're open 24 hours a day. And then the one down in Searchlight is open normally 10 to 2 during the week.
Okay. Now, are any of the museums offering tours, or is it more of a inviting place where people can just freely go and appreciate the artifacts?
That's what we do. We call it self-interpretive, and that's exactly what it is. Now, here at the County Museum, when we have school tours, we have volunteers that help the school tours know when to go to various areas of the grounds, and we have thought starters, which are publications that are available for the parents or whoever the adult is with the kids, so they can help the kids understand some of what they're seeing. But children are very good at understanding what they're seeing. And when they go through the houses here, or the wedding chapel, or the train depot, or any of that, they can pretty much tell where they're at.
Nice. Now, you mentioned a few items that we want to elaborate a little bit more. The chapel. Tell us a little bit about the chapel, and what do people expect to hear when they go there?
The wedding chapel we have here is the old candlelight wedding chapel. It was built in 1966 on the Strip. And it's an interesting one. It's based on the Little Church of the West, which in turn is based on an 1860s Episcopal church in Sonora, California. We took this one because we wanted to be able to talk about the industry of weddings. And when you look at the fact that 5% of all the weddings in the United States every year happen in Clark County, it is an industry here. And the chapel is an interesting one. When you go inside, there is a minister there. There are couples that are getting married. Of course, they're mannequins, because we can't let you into that part because of the way we restored it. But you can see what a wedding chapel would look like. And it's also interesting when you look at the chapel. One of the things I always point out is, if you look at the dais, if you look at where the minister stands and where you stand when you're taking your vows, and you really look at it, you realize that it's not even straight. It was merely a prop. It's not a church as we think of churches. It's not a sacred space in that way. You know, it is a chapel. It is a prop as a background to be able to get married and take pictures in.
And we would like to know, coming to Vegas, we know that comes Valentine's Day. It's obviously one of the most popular days to get married.
Yes.
Now, are there any records that reflect the usage of the chapel?
That's one of the things we like about our chapel, is it holds the record for the largest number of weddings in a single day. And that actually happened on a Valentine's Day in 1989. It started at 6 a.m. and through midnight, one wedding after the other. One lady did 425 weddings.
425?
Yes.
Oh,
and so that you don't have to get out your calculator, I can tell you that's 2.5 minutes per wedding, counting walking time. So it was pretty much a do you, yes, okay, you're married, out. Bring on the next ones. And it just was constant. And I've met the lady, Reverend Dolly DeLeon, very nice lady, and you know, she's still here in town and survived just fine.
Now, the other buildings that are part of what the public can come in and see, give us a little bit of a description of what they are and what is something iconic about each one.
Okay. We have 20 restored buildings here on site, as well as a ghost town area. Of the 20 restored buildings, a number of them are houses. We have the Beckley house. That was Will and Leva Beckley's home. It was built in 1912 and was the last home on 4th Street in downtown Las Vegas. We have the Goumond home, which was actually built in 1931, but it's restored to 1959 and talks about what the late 50s, early 60s were like in Las Vegas. We have the Odd Shop, which was actually the Giles Barkas house. And this was a small house originally built in Goldfield in 1924 and then moved down to Las Vegas and turned into an antique store. So it's got antiques on display in there as an antique store now. We have the Babcock and Wilcox house. This was one of the homes built in Boulder City for some of the workers who worked for Babcock and Wilcox, one of the companies who worked on the dam there. We have a Spartanet trailer from 1947. This was the high-end travel trailer of its day. It was a company that was owned by J. Paul Getty, and they really wanted to be the upper-end trailer company out there. They existed until 1962. But many people who came to Las Vegas, that's where they first lived, was in a trailer. We have a motor court cabin, and that one shows how people visited here in the 1920s and 30s. You didn't have motels, you had motor courts. And a motor court meant you had your own cabin to sleep in, but the bathroom and shower facilities were in a central building.
Interesting.
And then we have the Townside House from Henderson. These were demountable houses that were built during World War II for the workers that came in and created what is now the city of Henderson. We have a railroad cottage. These are the cinder block style houses that were built by the railroad between 1909 and 1911. We have one of those that's restored and open and show you what it was like to live here in the early part of the 20th century. We also have a barn here. The barn is from a homestead that was homesteaded in 1952, and it's now part of the city. But at that point, it was out on Charleston and Decatur.
Oh, so it got transferred.
Yeah, but when you think about that, Charleston and Decatur is in the middle of town.
Definitely.
And they were homesteading by even into the early 50s. So that was way out on the edge of town, and there was no town out there at that point. But we have that. We have the Union Pacific Depot, which was built in Boulder City in 1931. And we also have rolling stock. We have a train engine that used to be down at Fantasy Park downtown. We have a boxcar, a combination car. Have a caboose that you can walk through and see what it was like to be in a caboose on a railroad. Basically, we've got 30 acres here. We've got a lot to see. Beyond the houses, then we've got the ghost town, and you can walk through and see some of the buildings that were brought into town to create what was called the last frontier village in the late 1950s on the Strip. And we have the buildings that still exist from that. And then we've got walking trails where you can see what the desert used to look like here.
Very different than what we see nowadays in southern Nevada.
Absolutely. This was called the creosote desert. And there's lots of creosote plants and other plants. And if you look closely, you might see a few rabbits or some lizards out there. It's a natural area.
Very nice. Now, share with us a little bit of the history of the museum, the beginnings. I know that it started off with a woman who had a passion of collecting historic artifacts.
Yep.
How did it all begin?
Well, the lady you're talking about is Anna Roberts Parks. And Anna Roberts Parks was the first female mortician in Las Vegas. She founded a mortuary that had one palm tree out in front of it, so she called it Palm Mortuary. Might recognize that. They're still here.
Yes.
But she loved collecting. She loved old stuff. And so she would collect anything she could get her hands on, and had a sort of a private display on her property over on Sand Hill. And unfortunately died in the late 50s. And so the family had this collection and didn't know quite what to do with it. Well, in the mid-60s, a subcommittee of the Henderson Chamber of Commerce started looking at the fact that Henderson needed a museum. Now, Las Vegas didn't have one yet, but Henderson knew they wanted one. So they created the Southern Nevada Museum and worked with the family, the daughter of Anna Roberts Parks, and she eventually gave much of the collection to the museum. The museum actually opened in 1968. We're the oldest and largest museum in the Vegas Valley.
1968.
And we originally opened in downtown Henderson in the old gymnasium building from the old high school in where Henderson City Hall is today.
So was not housed on the
No,
current
wasn't
premises?
Here.
Okay.
But they knew that they were going to tear that building down. The building had been condemned. It didn't meet standards, so they knew it was going to have to be torn down. So the city of Henderson offered to what was then a private nonprofit that had been created to run the museum a piece of property way out and gone on Boulder Highway, the property that we're on here. It was a failed gravel claim. That and in fact, when we first moved out here, there were still some depressions where they had checked what level of gravel was here. So in 1974, in order to keep the land, the Southern Nevada Museum had to put something here, and they found out that the Union Pacific wanted to get rid of the depot that was in Boulder City. They'd offered it to Boulder City. Boulder City didn't want it. They didn't want to give it to a for-profit, to a business. They wanted it to go to a not-for-profit, but nobody in Boulder City wanted it. So finally, the then museum director, a fellow named Roy Purcell, local artist, contacted them and got permission to take the building and move it here. So it was the first building we actually moved onto the site. And for a number of years, we still worked out of downtown. It wasn't really until 1979 that we opened on this site. 1979 was when the county took over the museum. The museum was having financial problems and they knew they had to move, and they didn't have the money to do that. So the county came in, took over the museum, made it part of Parks and Recreation, and we moved everything out here, and this became the museum site. Later on that year, we got the Beckley House, which was the first house that came out here, and again, it was one that was going to be bulldozed. We don't take any buildings unless they're going to be destroyed if we don't take them. And they needed someplace to put it, so they brought it out here, and we sort of grew from that point. We've continuously added buildings over the years. We have one more building that still needs to be restored out here, and that's the Grand Canyon Airlines ticketing office, Bradley House. And that was the ticketing office for both Grand Canyon Airlines and TWA in Boulder City in the mid to late 1930s. And then became the home of the first black family that was allowed to live in Boulder City, because Boulder City was segregated in the early days. And so we felt that that was an important building to save.
Definitely.
So right now we're raising money to get that one restored, and when we do, we'll open it to the public.
And in addition to that restoration, are there any other unique projects or other initiatives that you will be undertaking to make it make good use of the site? Because obviously you guys definitely have room for expansion.
Oh, yes. We have a 30-acre site here. The next thing that we're going to be looking at isn't quite as sexy as that building, but we need a new storage building. So that's the next one that we'll be raising money for. We in the museum world, our job is to care for the past. Our primary concern is to make sure that everything we have today will be available for future generations, so that when you and I are gone and our children are gone and their children are gone, the children that are then here will still be able to learn. And that's what we want to do. Yes. And so we're basically holding the physical memories of the community. So even though it's not very sexy, having the right kinds of storage facilities is very important. And that's something, because we have the 3 museums in the system, and every artifact of those museums that isn't on display is stored here. And we've gotten to the point where we need a new building.
Definitely. Do you have any one unique item that you just find it just so special and unique that you like to hold on and talk about to the public? I mean, I know there must be dozens, but is there one that has an anecdote that it just inspires you or just brings good memories?
No, and I say that with it's like asking me which kid, which one of my two children I like the best. There are artifacts in a lot of different areas. I love talking about artifacts. I love talking about history and helping people to understand how we became what we are. And there are pieces that mean something to me because of the story behind them or how they came in, or maybe I knew the donor particularly well in that. But it's always there's so many. I've been asked this many times. I just find it difficult. I'm such an omnivore when it comes to history that I have to focus it down beyond that.
Of course, of course. Now, I know you're an author.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the books that you have written?
Sure. I've done 2 books, one in San Luis Obispo County that was a place names dictionary over there, and then one here a few years ago that is a street names dictionary called Asphalt Memories. And it is a book where if you go through it, you can learn who streets were named for. Why were they named what they are? When you find Gas Street, for example, you find out about Octavius Decatur Gas, who lived here. But then you see Decatur Street, and you think, oh, it must be also Octavius Decatur Gas. No, Decatur Street is named for Decatur, Illinois, which was the hometown of one of the 2 families that lived there.
Very interesting.
Oquendo is named for Rudy Oquendo, who was the first person to buy a lot on that street. So they named it for him. He was a dealer at the old Silverbird and I believe at the Sahara as well. But what I tried to do with that is give people a bite-sized series of histories that will help them to make ties to the community. Because one of the things that's unique about Clark County is that many of us are from somewhere else. As I said, I'm 4th generation Orange County, California. My great-grandfather settled over there in 1869. So I know the history over there. That was my family history. I come over here, I have to learn this. Many people come over here and they don't have a chance to learn the history here. And if you don't understand, at least to some extent, the history, it's hard to have the same level of pride in your community.
It is.
And that's something for the kids as well. Now, the kids, many of them are born here.
But the history, as far as understanding, I mean, they may have memorized geographically where the streets are, but that's very interesting. And those books are available
right here. Yes, and the San Luis Obispo book is out of print now, but the Asphalt Memories is available here at the museum. It's $9.95, and we don't charge any tax because we're a museum. We don't have to, and it's available for people, anybody that's interested. And it is. I'm told it is a fun read. I don't like to sound too egotistical, but I'm glad that I did it. And it's one of those that will, if you look through it, you can use it either as a dictionary. You're driving somewhere and you go, oh, Stewart. Who was Stewart? It can be done either way.
It definitely sounds like it's the next book to get and
Thank
be
you.
enlightened about what Clark County has and where those streets got their name. That's very interesting. Well, Mark, we've enjoyed so much learning about you and the museum, and we hope that the rest of the world also enjoys a little bit of history that we have in Southern Nevada, that Vegas extends beyond the Strip, and definitely this is a place to come and check out so that they get to see the real stories and behind a lot of what Southern Nevada has to offer.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much.